As Alice continued to kneel beside the bed, her hands trembling slightly from the weight of what had just happened, she watched in awe as Max stayed by John's side. The bond between them was undeniable, a silent connection that seemed to transcend the boundaries of language. Max's steady gaze never wavered from John's face, his amber eyes filled with a deep, almost mystical understanding. It was as if the dog knew something that no one else did, as if he could sense the faint stirrings of life that others might have missed. Alice took a step back, her heart racing as she glanced around the room. The other nurses, still in disbelief, were now beginning to understand that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. The ICU, usually a place of quiet despair, had been transformed into a sanctuary of hope, all because of a dog. The doctor on call, Dr. Simmons, entered the room, his eyes narrowing as he saw John's hand twitch again. He moved quickly to the bedside, checking John's vitals with practiced efficiency. "This is incredible," Dr. Simmons murmured under his breath, his voice barely audible as he adjusted the /4 and monitored the heart rate. Alice stood up, her legs unsteady as the realization of what was happening began to sink in. She couldn't believe it. She had witnessed countless moments of life and death in her career, but this felt different. This felt like a miracle. Max, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere, let out a soft bark, his tail wagging slightly. Alice smiled, tears welling up in her eyes as she reached down to pet the dog. "You did it, boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Max looked up at her, his eyes bright with something that could only be described as gratitude. He had done more than just sit by John's side. He had brought him back from the brink. Slowly, John's eyes fluttered open, the faintest glimmer of recognition flickering in his gaze. Alice's breath caught in her throat as she watched him struggle to focus. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, after a moment of silence, he managed to croak, "Max?" The word was barely audible, but it was enough. Max's ears perked up, and he bounded up to the bed, resting his head gently on John's lap. John's hand, still weak, reached out to stroke the dog's fur, a small but significant gesture that spoke volumes. Alice's heart swelled with emotion as she watched the reunion unfold before her. It was as if Max had known all along that his mission wasn't just to be by John's side, but to remind him of the strength and the love that still existed within him. The room was silent again, but this time, it was a silence filled with gratitude and awe. For a moment, Alice allowed herself to savor the quiet peace that had settled over the room. The battle was not over, and John still had a long road to recovery ahead of him. But in this moment, there was hope. Hope that, with the help of a loyal dog and the determination of those around him, John would pull through. As Max nuzzled John's hand, Alice knew that this was more than just a medical miracle. It was a testament to the power of loyalty, of love, and of second chances. And for the first time in a long time, Alice felt something she hadn't felt in a while: faith. Faith in the impossible. As the days passed, the ICU had become a place of quiet healing. John Parker, once lying motionless and unaware of the world around him, was now slowly regaining strength. His fingers twitched more often, his eyes fluttering open to take in the room around him. The presence of Max never wavered. The loyal German shepherd was by John's side, resting his head on the bed, never leaving, as if to remind his owner that he was not alone. Alice Carter, the nurse who had witnessed the first miracle, continued her rounds, but she found herself drawn back to John's room again and again. She had seen patients fight for life, but what was happening here was different. There was something magical in the air, something unspoken between a soldier and his dog. Every time she entered the room, she could feel the weight of their bond, a connection that transcended anything she had experienced in her medical career. One afternoon, as Alice checked on John's progress, she noticed him awake, his eyes fixed on Max, who was sitting at the foot of the bed, tail slightly wagging. "He's still here," John muttered, his voice raspy but filled with gratitude. Alice smiled, her heart swelling. At the sight of the two of them together, "He'll never leave," she replied softly, knowing that the bond between them was unbreakable. Slowly, John began to sit up in bed, his muscles aching from the long weeks of immobility. Max jumped to his side, sensing his friend's struggle, offering his silent support. "You're doing great," Alice encouraged. adjusting John's pillows to make him more comfortable. We'll take it one step at a time. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, John grew stronger. Max, always by his side, had become a source of comfort and motivation. The small victories, lifting his hand, moving his legs slightly, were celebrated with Max's gentle nuzzles and soft whines of approval. It was as if Max understood that every tiny movement was a triumph, a step closer to recovery. Alice couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of both John and Max. She had never seen a patient recover with such determination, nor had she witnessed a dog display such unwavering loyalty. The ICU had become a place of unexpected hope, where miracles weren't just reserved for the doctors and nurses, but for the quiet moments shared between a man and his dog. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital, casting a warm glow over the room, John whispered, "Thank you, Max." The dog's ears perked up, and he trotted over to John's side, resting his head on his lap. John stroked Max's fur gently, his hand steady now, no longer trembling from the weakness that had once consumed him. "I'm going to get better," John said, his voice stronger now, filled with determination. "And we'll go home together." Alice stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She knew that John's journey wasn't over yet, but in that moment, she felt a sense of peace. The power of loyalty, love, and second chances had worked its magic once more. Max had not only saved John's life, he had reminded everyone in that room of the strength that comes from unwavering devotion. It was a bond that couldn't be broken, a friendship that defied all odds. And as Alice quietly left the room, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest healing came not from medicine, but from the love of a dog. As the weeks continued to pass, John's progress became a story of its own. Each small step he took brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. He was no longer confined to his bed. His muscles, though stiff and weak, began to respond to therapy. And with each passing day, his bond with Max grew even stronger. The dog, once a silent observer, had become an essential part of John's rehabilitation. Max's presence was more than just comfort. It was a symbol of resilience, of a strength that John had nearly lost but now found again. On one particularly bright morning, John stood at the window of his hospital room, looking out over the city. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the streets below. He felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him as he stared at the world outside, a world that felt so distant just a few weeks ago. He could almost hear the sound of his boots on the ground, the rhythm of his steps as he had once walked with purpose. But now, those steps were hesitant, unsure. "It's a long road ahead," Alice had told him earlier that week, as she helped him with his physical therapy. But John was no longer afraid of the long road. He had come this far, and with Max by his side, he knew he could go further. Max, as always, was there, sitting quietly beside him. His loyal eyes never left John's face, as if reassuring him that no matter how difficult the journey was, they would face it together. John reached down and stroked Max's fur, feeling the warmth of the dog's presence seep into his own skin. "We're going home soon," John whispered. "You and me, buddy. We'll be all right." That evening, after a long day of therapy and recovery, John finally stood, with help, from the bed. His legs wobbled, and he leaned heavily on the walker, but he felt something shift inside him. It was as if a new determination had taken root in his soul. Max was right there with him, walking by his side, his tail wagging softly. For the first time in weeks, John felt the weight of the world lift slightly from his shoulders. It was just a few steps, but to him, it felt like the first real victory since the day he had been brought into the hospital. He took another step, then another, each one a little stronger than the last. Max never left his side. The dog walked beside him, his head held high, his presence a constant reminder of the strength that lay within John. One step at a time, John muttered to himself, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. It was a mantra he had adopted, and it had carried him through the darkest moments of his recovery. He had come so far, but the road was still long. As the days went on, John's recovery continued at a steady pace. He was no longer the broken man he had been when he first entered the ICU. His body was healing, and his spirit was stronger than ever. But it was not just the medical treatments or the physical therapy that had brought him this far. It was Max, who had never once left his side. Max, who had been there when John had lost hope and reminded him that there was always something worth fighting for. As the weeks turned into months, John could feel himself returning to the person he had been before the accident. He wasn't the same, of course. The road to recovery had changed him, shaped him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. But with Max at his side, John knew that whatever came next, he could face it. Together, they had overcome the impossible. And together, they would continue to fight. Months passed, and John's life had slowly transformed. He had left the hospital, his muscles still weak but growing stronger each day. He wasn't the man he had been before the accident, but in many ways, he felt more alive than ever before. With Max by his side, every step forward seemed easier, as if the bond they shared was the driving force behind his recovery. John spent his days training and building back his strength, but there was always one constant: Max. The dog was no longer just a companion. He was his anchor, his reminder that no matter how dark the road had been, there was always hope. On a crisp autumn morning, as John sat on the porch of his small house, watching the leaves fall from the trees, Max trotted up beside him. The dog sat down and nudged his arm with his nose, a silent reminder that they still had a long way to go. John smiled and scratched Max behind the ears. "You're a good boy, you know that?" he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. Max's tail wagged slowly, as if acknowledging the praise. It was a quiet morning, peaceful and calm. John had learned to appreciate these moments, those simple, quiet moments that he had once taken for granted. "We've come a long way, huh?" John said, more to himself than to Max. The dog didn't need words to understand. He knew what John meant. He had been there every step of the way, through the pain, the doubts, and the slow progress. Max had never given up on him, even when John had lost faith in himself. As the weeks continued to pass, John's strength grew, and with it, his confidence. He was no longer afraid of the future. He had learned to face each day with determination, knowing that whatever came next, he had Max by his side. Together, they had fought through the darkest days and emerged stronger than before. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the fields, John stood up and walked over to the fence, Max trailing closely behind him. He rested his hand on the wooden railing and looked out over the horizon. The world seemed so vast, so full of possibilities. "I think we're ready for the next step," John said quietly, his voice steady. Max sat down next to him, his eyes fixed on John, as if waiting for him to make the next move. The dog had always known when to stand by and when to push forward. He trusted John, just as John trusted him. It was a bond that couldn't be broken. As John looked out over the land, he knew that this was just the beginning. The journey he had started all those months ago was far from over, but with Max by his side, he felt ready for whatever came next. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was a road they would walk together. And that thought, simple yet profound, filled John with a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. Max had given him the strength to keep going, the courage to face whatever lay ahead. And for that, John would be forever grateful. Together, they had fought for a future, and together, they would continue to fight, one step at a time. As the months went by, John found himself settling into a new rhythm of life, one that had been shaped by the unwavering loyalty of his dog, Max. Every morning, as the sun began to rise, John would wake up, stretch his limbs, and make his way to the kitchen, where Max would already be waiting, his tail wagging in anticipation. The dog had become a steady companion in the most comforting way, and John had learned to appreciate the quiet moments they shared. But it wasn't just the routine that had changed. John had changed, too. He was no longer the broken man who had been wheeled into the ICU that fateful day. His muscles had grown stronger, and his mind had become more focused, more determined. But despite all his progress, he knew that it was Max who had truly helped him find his way back. One morning, as John stood outside his house, feeling the crisp autumn air against his skin, Max stood beside him, watching the world go by. The leaves had begun to fall from the trees, painting the ground in shades of gold and brown. It was a perfect day, and John felt a deep sense of gratitude. "We've made it this far, haven't we, buddy?" he said, looking down at Max. The dog looked up at him, his amber eyes filled with an understanding that only a dog could possess. John had learned so much from Max. The dog had shown him the power of loyalty, of living in the moment, and of never giving up, no matter how hard things got. Together, they had faced the most challenging days, and together, they had come out stronger. As John began to walk across the yard, taking slow but steady steps, Max followed closely behind. It was a simple act, but it meant everything. Each step John took was a victory, a testament to the hard work and perseverance that had brought him this far. Max, never more than a few feet away, stayed by his side, providing the quiet reassurance that John needed. With each step, John felt the weight of the past begin to lift. He knew that the journey ahead would still be long, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. The pain that had once overwhelmed him had faded, replaced by a sense of strength and purpose. The bond he shared with Max had made all the difference. As the days turned into weeks, John's strength continued to grow, and the relationship between him and Max only deepened. John found himself spending more time outdoors, taking long walks with Max by his side, enjoying the fresh air and the simple pleasure of being alive. Every step was a reminder of how far he had come, and how much he had to be thankful for. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape, John sat on the porch, Max lying beside him. They watched as the sky slowly changed colors, the day giving way to night. It was a moment of peace, a moment of reflection. John thought back to all the challenges he had faced, the struggles he had endured, and the moments of doubt that had almost broken him. But now, with Max by his side, he felt a sense of calm. He had come a long way, and there was still much more to be done, but he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same resilience, the same determination, and the same loyal companion by his side. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, John smiled. Looking down at Max, "We've got this," he whispered, knowing that the journey was far from over. But with Max, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As the days turned into weeks, John's life became more than just about recovery. It became a story of transformation. He was no longer simply going through the motions of physical therapy and rehabilitation. He was living again. With Max at his side, every task became a small victory. Whether it was getting out of bed without help or walking the short distance to the mailbox, each accomplishment brought him a little closer to the man he once was. But there was something deeper that had changed within John. He was no longer haunted by the doubts that had once overwhelmed him. He had learned to live in the present, to appreciate the small moments, and most of all, to appreciate the loyalty and love that Max had given him. One cool afternoon, as John walked across the yard, Max trotting beside him, he noticed something. For the first time in months, he wasn't focused on the physical pain, the limitations, or the challenges. He was simply enjoying the walk. The air was fresh, the grass beneath his feet was soft, and Max's companionship made every step feel effortless. John smiled as Max barked playfully, chasing after a falling leaf. The simple joy of the moment struck him, and for the first time, he allowed himself to just be happy. Later that evening, John sat in his favorite chair by the window, Max curled up at his feet. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside. It was in these moments of stillness that John found peace. He thought about all the things he had endured and all the people who had helped him along the way. But most of all, he thought about Max. The dog had been with him through it all, offering nothing but unconditional love and loyalty. "I couldn't have done this without you," John whispered to Max, who responded with a soft nudge of his nose against John's hand. The bond they shared was more than just that of a man and his dog. It was something deeper, something that went beyond words. Max had been his constant, his reminder that no matter how dark the days had been, there was always something worth fighting for. The next morning, as John sat down to his morning coffee, he felt a sense of gratitude fill him. He had made it this far, but the journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still a road to walk. But John no longer felt afraid. He had found his strength, his purpose, and his partner in Max. Together, they had faced the impossible. And together, they would continue to move forward, one step at a time. It was a quiet afternoon when John decided to take a step further. He had grown accustomed to his daily routine, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't just going through the motions. He was embracing life again, with Max as his constant companion. They had spent so many hours together, and the bond between them had only deepened. Max had been there through the darkest moments, and now, as the leaves turned from green to shades of gold, John felt ready to face the world once more. John stood up slowly, his legs still stiff but stronger than before. Max, always aware of John's movements, watched him closely. It had become a silent understanding between them. Max would always be there, by his side, no matter the pace of the journey. "Let's go for a walk," John said softly, more to himself than to Max, though the dog's ears perked up immediately. They stepped outside into the cool, crisp air. The grass beneath their feet was soft, the sky a pale blue with wisps of clouds drifting by. For the first time in a long while, John felt no rush, no pressure. There was no place he needed to be, no goal to reach other than the simple act of moving forward. He walked at his own pace, taking in the sights and sounds of the world around him. Max stayed by his side, walking with the same steady rhythm that John had come to depend on. It was moments like this that made John realize how much he had taken for granted before. The small, everyday things, like the feeling of the wind on his face or the crunch of leaves underfoot, had become treasures. John stopped for a moment to look out over the field. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over everything. It was peaceful, a perfect moment of quiet reflection. He had been so focused on the past, on the struggles he had faced, that he hadn't taken the time to appreciate the present. Now, with Max by his side, he realized just how much he had to be grateful for. "I never thought I'd be here again," John said quietly, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "But I am. And it's because of you, Max." Max gave a soft bark, as if acknowledging John's words. The dog nuzzled against his leg, a simple gesture of affection that spoke volumes. John smiled, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. It was a reminder of the power of loyalty, of the love that had carried him through the darkest days. As they continued their walk, John thought about the future. He wasn't sure what it held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but with Max by his side, John knew he could face anything. The bond they shared had become unbreakable, a testament to the strength of their connection. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, John and Max walked together into the evening, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. John had come to a place in his life where he no longer looked back. The struggles, the pain, the doubts that had once clouded his mind were all a part of his past, something he had fought through and survived. With Max by his side, he was no longer a man burdened by the weight of what had been. He was a man who had found his way again. The journey had been long, but it had brought him to this peaceful moment. Sitting on the porch with Max curled up beside him, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had learned so much through the trials he had faced, about strength, perseverance, and, most importantly, about the power of love and loyalty. Max had been there through it all, never wavering, always by his side. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been a guide, a beacon of light in the darkest of times. Looking out at the horizon, John felt a sense of clarity. The future no longer seemed uncertain or daunting. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew that he had the strength to face them. With Max beside him, he felt invincible. "We've made it this far, haven't we, buddy?" John said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. Max looked up at him, his tail giving a slow wag, as if in agreement. It was a simple moment, but one that held so much meaning. John had found his peace. It wasn't something he had expected to find again after all that had happened, but it was here now. It was in the quiet moments like this, sitting in the stillness of the evening, that John realized just how much he had gained. His recovery had not been just about regaining his strength. It had been about rediscovering what truly mattered, the people and the dog who had never left him, the moments of quiet joy that had once seemed insignificant. Now, those were the moments that filled him with the most gratitude. The sound of the wind rustling the trees in the distance, the faint chirping of the crickets, and the soft breathing of Max beside him. These were the things John cherished. They were the reminders that life was fragile, but also beautiful. He had learned to embrace the present, to appreciate every little thing that life had to offer. As the days continued to unfold, John walked forward with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just surviving. He was truly living. Max remained his constant companion, the dog who had carried him through the hardest parts of his journey. Together, they had overcome the impossible. Together, they had proven that with love, loyalty, and a little bit of faith, anything was possible. And as John stood up to head inside for the night, Max following closely behind, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side, just as they always had.